fate pressed down like judgment as the world held its breath. After Cain spilled his brother's blood, the fields that once answered to Abel's gentle hands turned mute and heavy. The echo of that crime seemed to hum beneath the soil, and Cain knew the gaze of the Most High no longer rested upon him. Marked and undone, he turned his back on the garden stories and the old paths, bearing a weight that no man could share. Pride kept his shoulders square, but his soul had torn like fabric in a storm. He walked eastward away from the familiar hills and rivers, toward a land that had no welcome and no memory of him. They called it Nod, the country of wanderers, where every horizon promised much and yielded nothing. He did not go alone. A woman traveled at his side, kin of his house, born of the same ancient dust as he. Her eyes carried a quiet courage, though fear shivered in their depths. She did not speak often on that long road. Her presence was the language of hope, a living refusal to leave him to the silence he had sown. When at last they reached a stretch of hard earth and thorn, there they made their first shelter, a ring of stones and woven branches against the bitter nights. The wind moved through the scrub like a whisper they could not unhear, and sometimes, when it shifted, Cain thought it spoke Abel's name. One night, as the flames lowered to coals, the woman broke the hush that had wrapped itself around their days. "What future can grow out here?" she asked, her voice steady but small. "Will we always run from what we have done?" Cain watched embers pulse and dim. "The face that blessed my steps has turned from me," he said. "But life is still life. Even in exile, we must make something that will not vanish with the morning." She laid her hand over his, and in that simple touch there was a vow. If the world would not shelter them, they would build their own shelter. If the past would not release them, they would forge a new beginning. Seasons turned. In that lean country the woman conceived, and hope fragile, astonishing took root where grief had camped. When her labor ended and the child cried out, Cain felt the ground tilt beneath him. He named his son Enoch, dedicated like a stone laid at the start of a foundation. The name was a prayer and a challenge, that the line would not wander forever, that something fixed and lasting might be set in a world that had known only loss and the drift of punishment. Cain began to build, stone on stone, timber after timber. He raised a wall, then a gate, then a shelter that would hold through the winds. Each hammer blow was a contradiction to the sentence pronounced over him. Each course of rock, a defiance of the destiny of a vagabond. He called the place by his son's name, Enoch, so the city would remember what it owed its existence to, not to the pride of a man, but to the fragile mercy of a child's birth. Paths formed where feet passed. Voices gathered where walls kept out the night air. Smoke rose at evening and did not blow away at dawn. The earth, which had rejected him, began to bear the shape of his hands. But within those newborn streets, two truths walked side by side. Guilt, a shadow that did not fade in sunlight. Life, a flame that refused to be smothered. Cain, who once stained the field, now set watch over thresholds and doors, and lifted his eyes to see whether his son slept safely. His daughters grew and laughed in the courtyards, and when Enoch came of age, he took a wife from among them. The lineage branched, thread by thread, and the city's name became more than a word. It became a memory carved into wood, a boast whispered in markets, a refuge for people who preferred hands to altars, craft to contrition. Yet, the absence of worship hollowed the splendor. In Enoch's markets, beauty and skill were prized, speed of hand and cleverness of mind applauded. But the songs that rose at night did not travel upward. They circled the squares and fell back to earth, full of longing for their own echo. Even as tents multiplied beyond the wall and fires patterned the hills, something essential lay missing, like a chord played without its root note. Still, the city grew, and with it grew the certainty that men could shape the world by their wills alone. Cain stood upon his work and felt both the ache of exile and the pull of permanence. A man caught between the wound he caused and the future he dared to claim. And the children who chased each other through the alleys learned an unspoken lesson. Here, where stone holds back the wind, what a man builds endures longer than what he confesses. The city that bore Enoch's name became the mold for others. Paths flared outward like spokes, tents clustered, tools multiplied. Men who could not bear the quiet of sky and field learned to fill the air with making. From Cain's line rose a generation restless with talent, quick to adorn the earth as if it were a body awaiting jewelry. Lamech came among them, a man whose stride matched the boast of his voice. He did not inherit remorse. He inherited momentum. Where his fathers built walls, he built households that stretched the definition of covenant. He took 2 wives, Ada and Zillah, and in that choice a new tone entered the song of the city. Opulence without restraint, love bent into possession, the pride of hunger calling itself freedom. Ada, whose name suggested ornament and brightness, glided through the markets with the confidence of a queen. The eyes that followed her measured beauty the way traders measured grain. Zillah moved in shadow-soft grace, a hush to Ada's flare. The promise of shelter turned inward, a comfort that asked no questions. Their tents shone with dyed fabrics and bronze mirrors. Their footsteps left behind perfumes that lingered longer than prayers. In their laughter, people heard the future of desire, eager, demanding, costly. Sons and daughters sprang from Lamech's house like sparks from a forge, each child an answer to the city's secret gods. Jabal learned to fold the world into journeys. He stretched canvas over poles and called it home. He led herds across hills until he could read the wind like a map. He taught men to live in motion, to make of pasture and season a livelihood, and the lowing of cattle became the drumbeat of prosperity. Jubal listened to strings and hollow reeds until they confessed their hidden voices. He drew songs from wood and gut that curled around the night fires and warmed the hearts of dancers. Music became a second language for desire, a way for the body to speak when words would only limit it. Then came Tubal-Cain, apprentice to flame. He stared into the mouth of the furnace until he understood its grammar, then negotiated with ore until it became compliant. Under his hammer, stubborn metal found its purpose and developed an appetite. Knives cut more cleanly, plowshares bit more deeply, spearheads promised outcomes that once required patience. The clang of iron on iron became the city's anthem, and people began to measure their worth by the weight of what they could lift and the shine of what they could wear. Tools, yes, but also weapons. The shape of a future no one admitted out loud. Progress dressed itself as triumph. Markets littered with crafted goods, music weaving through alleys, tents glittering like small constellations against the dusk. Everything looked like blessing to eyes that had forgotten the giver. The songs no longer sought the heavens. They circled bonfires and fed upon the emotions that made them. Beauty, once a window, became a mirror. Skill, once service, became spectacle. And the city applauded itself until the applause drowned out the memory of altars. But the story did not end in Enoch's streets. Far from the walls that kept the wind out, Adam and Eve learned to live with grief, the way one lives with weather always there. always shaping the day. Their sorrow became a language, and in time God gave them a word spoken in mercy, a son named Seth, appointed, placed, not as a decoration to cover a wound, but as a seed set deep in ground, choked by thorns. Seth grew without the theater of the city. He learned the names of stars by watching, not by building towers to reach them. He bore the ache of his family's history, but did not let it shape his face. He taught his children to listen before they worked, to remember before they planned. Among his sons was one called Enoch, mortal, frail, an admission carved into a name. Enoch knew, as surely as farmers know the difference between chaff and grain, that man's life is a breath and his strength a candle. It was in his days that something new and ancient broke the surface of time. Men began to call upon the name of the Lord, not as a habit borrowed from their fathers, not as a charm to hang around the neck when travel grew dangerous, but as a turning of the whole heart toward the one whose breath had made them. They gathered on high ground and in quiet valleys, lifting speech that did not seek its own echo. Where the music of Jubal spiraled inward, their prayer stretched upward. Where the iron of Tubal-Cain promised control, their worship yielded control. Two lines move through the same world now, as distinct as rivers flowing beside each other without mixing. The first Cain's inheritance polished the earth until it reflected human ambition. It wrote poems to the body, crowned appetite, welded pride into policy. The second Seth's seed learned to live with open hands. It judged a day not by what it acquired, but by whether the name of the Lord was on its breath when the stars rose. In markets and pastures, on caravan routes and at quiet hearths, these lines glimpsed each other like strangers passing. Admiration flickered, curiosity stirred, and something in the heart of the world began to lean, ever so slightly, toward a choice whose consequences would be measured in giants. Trade braided the two lines together long before desire did. Herds needed salt and metal, caravans needed wool, leather, and grain. The sons of Seth crossed city thresholds to barter honestly, and the sons of Cain welcomed them with practiced smiles and open scales. Curiosity walked beside every transaction. Eyes lingered on the forged brilliance that caught the sun, on fabrics threaded with color like captured dusk, on music that seemed to loosen knots within the chest. Admiration, first harmless, learned to dress itself as permission. When the markets filled and bonfires rose, the city put on its festival face. Wine moved from cup to throat with the ease of a stream finding a river. Drums taught feet to forget caution. The daughters of men appeared in garments sewn to flatter movement, hair set with bright stones, hands scented with oils that left trails sweet as promises. The sons of Seth, who had been taught to weigh a moment by eternity, found themselves measuring by the pulse. Among them was Lamech, a quiet man with honest hands. He had come to exchange hides and cheese for tools and to be gone by sunrise. But a woman watched him as one appraises a rare thing. Her name was Naamah. Her smile lived halfway between welcome and challenge, and when she spoke, her voice turned attention into invitation. "Stranger," she said, "does your God forbid you to enjoy what he made?" She pressed a cup into his hand as if it belonged there. Lamech hesitated, felt the warmth of the vessel and the warmth of her nearness. "He calls us to be clean," he answered. "Some joys unmake the one who takes them." Naamah laughed softly, as though the word clean were a child's toy. "Then take the joy that makes you whole," she whispered, stepping closer until his resolve could feel her breath. Lamech had been taught to run from edges, but his feet did not move. The music pressed like tide water at his ankles, and Naamah knew the currents. She led him from the square's noise toward darker alleys, where lanterns painted amber circles on stone. When he returned to his camp at dawn, he carried himself differently. A door had shut behind him. He did not speak the name of the Lord that morning. His brothers saw and understood. Enoch, whose conscience kept sharp as flint, took Lamech aside. "You have traded more than goods," he said. "Your heart wears a new yoke." Lamech's eyes flashed, pride masquerading as peace. "You call bondage what feels like awakening," he replied. "We have starved our bodies and named it worship. There is sweetness we have refused because we feared it. I have tasted, and I will not spit it out for your sake." The argument spread like a smell. Some nodded to Enoch's warning. Others found Lamech's boldness an answer to secret questions. The festival returned the next month, then the next, and men who swore they only came to sell began to arrive with empty wagons and hungry eyes. Naamah did not hide Lamech, and Lamech did not hide Naamah. Their union became a story told in markets and along roads. "See how the distance closes," said Abijah, a man with a restless gaze. "If his joy is real, why should I be less alive?" Ijah and Samir, young, strong, easy with laughter, found the same path Lamech had taken, smoothed by footsteps. "We will not stay aloof," they said. "If their city teaches skill and pleasure, we will learn both." Enoch stood among them like a lone tree on a plain, straight because it had to be. "Brothers," he pleaded, "you cannot mix light and darkness and keep the light. Your children will not know where their first name comes from." But ambition had woken in the camp, and desire had already learned the word inheritance. The thought took shape. If a man could join strength to beauty, craft to cunning, perhaps his sons would rise like towers. Men who once prayed for wisdom now dreamed of bloodlines. In the hush between caravans, Naamah bore Lamech a son. They named him Ardok Dominion because he seemed to fill the tent with his voice. He walked early, held Lamech's wrist with a grip that made his father laugh and wince. Neighbors came to see, left whispering, returned with friends. "The child is not like other children," they said. "He is more." The rumor did its work. The line of Seth began to tilt, and men who had kept themselves from the city's charms now kept their distance from prayer instead. If this is the fruit, they reasoned, why not sow the same seed? And the decision that would change the face of the earth stepped quietly into the camp and sat down as if it had always belonged there. Ardok grew like a storm bred over warm seas, quiet at first, then suddenly everywhere. The boy outpaced seasons, shouldering into strength that seemed borrowed from another order of being. When he laughed, other children flinched. When he wrestled, grown men found themselves on the ground, breathless and smiling strangely, as if they had glimpsed a future they did not understand. Lamech wore pride like a new cloak. Naamah watched with the serenity of a queen whose prophecy had come true. The tale ran ahead of them. It crossed caravan routes, threaded along trade gossip, and reached tents that had once kept a careful distance from city music. A son like a pillar, the story said, a stride like a hunter's, hands like iron. The idea turned from rumor into blueprint. If one union had yielded such a child, then many unions might draft a new race. Desire found a principle to drape itself in and called it destiny. Abijah, quick to name boldness as virtue, spoke where the young gathered. "We feared the city and starved our blood," he said, the fire stamping gold on his face. "But see what comes when a man refuses to be small. We talk of altars and forget inheritance. What will your sons carry your cautions or your crowns?" Ijah and Samir answered by action rather than debate. They chose wives whose bracelets chimed when they moved, daughters of men whose laughter made watchmen forget their posts. Others followed, some secretly, some with ceremony as loud as drums. Enoch stood his ground until the ground shifted under him. "You cannot baptize your hunger by calling it legacy," he warned. "You are trading the quiet of God's favor for the noise of your own name. But noise has a way of persuading the heart that it is music. Men who once paused to let conscience speak now hurried past the pause, dragging reason behind them like a reluctant mule. They told themselves they would keep both devotion and delight, and discovered too late that delight resented sharing. Years turned, and tents filled with children whose growth charted a steeper line. Shoulders broadened early, voices carried, eyes held a sharp, compelling light that made adults look away first. Ardok, first among the first, taught them games that were thinly veiled tests, taught them to love the feeling of being impossible to move. They lifted stones together and called it play, felled trees together and called it practice. When they ran, dust rose as if the earth objected. When they sparred, the ground remembered their feet. Names changed. People called them mighty, as if the title were a crown that cost nothing. Songs learned new verses in their honor. Drum patterns lengthened to fit their strides. Where Jubal's music once chased pleasure, it now courted legend. Mothers boasted in markets that they had borne heroes. Fathers carved marks into doorposts to measure sons, and found they had to raise the lintel. With stature came appetite. The young giants ate like harvesters and then like armies. They began to treat fields as proving grounds, to wrench up shrubs and saplings by their roots, to trample furrows as if rules were for smaller men. Laughter followed the damage. The first time a gate broke beneath a shoulder, it was an accident. The second time, it was a wager. By the third, it was a sport with onlookers and side bets. Men who objected were lifted gently out of the way and set down somewhere else, to general amusement. The city welcomed this spectacle because spectacle distracts. Markets grew richer, festivals longer. New shrines rose, shaped not for repentance, but for admiration. Priests learned what crowds wanted and traded sacrifice for ceremony. They burned sweet resins, lifted ornate blades, poured wine on stones that drank nothing. The daughters of men danced until sweat webbed their skin with light. The sons of Seth, sons no longer in anything but name, cheered with a hunger that did not recognize itself as worship. When disputes flared, the giants settled them. A hand on a shoulder, a pressure like a yoke, a smile that showed too many teeth. Justice grew taller and rougher. People said it was efficient. Peace descended not as mercy, but as weight. A caravan that failed to pay the new tribute discovered its wheels snapped and its camels scattered by shadows that moved with the speed of certainty. Villages that hesitated to open their grain stores found their doors smiling outward like broken mouths. Ardok looked at what he and his companions had become and felt only confirmation. "We are the proof," he told Lamech, whose old pride had hardened into doctrine. "We are the answer to the earth's call for strength." Lamech heard what he longed to hear and repeated it where it could echo. Nara said little, but when she walked through the square, people moved aside in patterns that looked like homage. In the camps that still tried to keep the name of the Lord on their lips, prayer thinned. Altars gathered dust when journeys to the city grew frequent. When elders called for fasts, the young smiled and held up full cups. "We will honor both," they said, but they honored the louder first and the quieter not at all. The boundary between the lines wore down like a path crossed too often. And the sons of God, seeing that the daughters of men were dazzling and near, took as many as they wished. No vows were strong enough to hold back a hand that had discovered its own power. Thus, the earth began to tilt toward violence, the way a table tilts when a leg shortens. Not all at once, not with a single crash, but with a steady slide that spilled truth, then mercy, then restraint onto the floor. Strength had become a language everyone understood and few could answer. At night, when the fires coiled upward and the drums spoke in a syntax of hunger, the air itself seemed to change. It tasted of iron and sweet smoke, of promises made to no one higher than the human heart. And the giants named mighty, praised as ancient of story, though their beards were not yet full, stood in the squares like omens that smiled. The more the earth applauded strength, the more strength forgot why it existed. Giants learned to turn days into tournaments. Morning began with wagers, noon with contests, evening with retellings whose heroes grew taller with each voice. What first passed as play hardened into right. They hurled stones not to clear fields but to hear gates complain. They bent spears into necklaces to prove spears were beneath them. They laughed at distance, swam flooded fords for sport, chased wild bulls to the cliff's lip, and asked the watching crowd which would fall first. The bulls always did. Pleasure, having tasted power, demanded a temple. Shrines rose in the squares like teeth. No one asked the heavens what should be set upon those altars. The crowd decided, and the priests complied. Wine flowed, oil burned, and the sweet smoke learned the lesson of the music before it. It spiraled downward, heavy as a secret. Girls were crowned for beauty, and men for ruthlessness. Songs braided their names together until the crowd forgot which it cheered, the face or the fist. With appetite came invention. The forge, once the friend of plow and spade, married itself to spectacle. Tubal-Cain's apprentices shaped blades that were beautiful enough to distract and sharp enough to settle an argument no words could mend. The city's law grew brief. What can be taken belongs to the hand that can hold it. Merchants learned to smile with trembling. Widows learned to close their doors before sunset. Travelers learned to sleep with one eye open and one foot toward the road. The young mimicked what they saw. Boys measured themselves not by obedience or craft, but by the fear they could seed in a square with nothing but a grin. They stole not because they were hungry, but because restraint was treated as a defect. When elders protested, the giants listened with the attentiveness a cat gives a bird bath, amused, patient, certain of the outcome. "You speak of old ways," they'd say, guiding the elder aside with 2 fingers. "We speak of the world as it is." There were moments quiet, fragile when conscience tried to surface. A mother, watching her son return with dust on his cheeks and another boy's blood on his knuckles, whispered a name she hadn't said in years. An old shepherd, finding his flocks scattered for sport, lifted his eyes toward a sky he once trusted. But the city drowned such moments with noise. Drums traveled like weather. Festivals proliferated. Every week became a holy day to the self. Excess needed new fuel and found it in blasphemy. Some giants began to carve their likenesses on pillars, to inscribe boasts in lines that ran like rivers around temple courts. "We are the sons of power," the stone declared. "We rule by right of strength." The crowd read and repeated until the echo sounded like truth. Others declared themselves favored by nameless stars, demanded offerings that tasted of fear, grain beyond the tithe, cattle beyond prudence, sometimes even the unthinkable. People complied because terror, when baptized as reverence, wears a convincing robe. Stories multiplied like weeds after rain. Villages that resisted tribute found their wells filled with rubble, their granaries burning like torches at noon. Caravans disappeared into ravines where laughter was heard but no rescue came. On the borders where pasture met city, men built watchtowers and slept with their sandals on. Mothers marked their children with soot and old prayers, hoping to hide them from the eye that sought beautiful things. In the tents that still carried Seth's memory like a fading scent, a remnant tried to keep the name of the Lord unforgotten. They gathered at dusk and dawn, hands open, faces lifted, voices steadier than their numbers. But even there, the world's tilt made itself felt. Some came late, smelling of festivals. Some brought questions sharper than spears. What has worship bought us? The mighty eat, the mighty sing, the mighty take what they want. Perhaps we have misunderstood the times. Elders answered with patience that sounded to young ears like surrender. To bow is to be preserved, they said. To fear the Lord is life. Their listeners nodded and drifted toward the glow on the horizon. Then the earth itself began to complain. Fields exhausted by trampling yielded thorns. Rivers, muddied by ruined banks, forgot their channels and wandered. Rain missed its season. Heat stayed too long. Beasts that once lay down under the shepherd's staff now startled at shadows, as if the air had learned to carry malice. At night, even laughter sounded like the rehearsal for a roar. Above this, unseen but not absent, the gaze that measures galaxies watched men measure one another with scales fashioned from pride. The one who planted breath in Adam and taught Abel the grammar of sacrifice saw altars cold and knives warm, saw children taught to flex before they were taught to pray. Grief gathered where wrath begins. The world, which had been sung into being, had tuned itself to a different key, and the note it loved most was violence. Still, a thread held, a name whispered, a family line that chose to be small rather than loud, taught its children to answer night with trust. And in that line, unnoticed by drums and uninteresting to scribes, a man learned to walk blameless in a crooked age. His name had not yet been spoken aloud by the world, but heaven had said it, and the syllables sounded like a door, the door that mercy chooses before judgment comes. His name was Noah. He did not glitter in the squares or carve boasts into stone. He learned righteousness the slow way, by returning what wasn't his, by speaking truth when silence would have paid better, by keeping a small fire burning when the wind argued. He planted and tended, married and taught his sons to weigh strength by service. While cities rehearsed celebration, Noah rehearsed obedience until it sounded like peace within him. He heard what few were listening for. In the stillness before dawn, when the world's noise had not yet dressed itself for the day, a word arrived that was not born of his own thoughts. It was weight and mercy together. The earth is filled with violence. The end of all flesh has come before me. It did not sound like a threat. It sounded like the truth finally spoken aloud. In that same breath came command and way out. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood, rooms within, pitch within and without. Measure it by my measure length and breadth and height. A door on the side, 3 decks, a window for the light that will remain. Noah did not bargain. He gathered his sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth and told them what he had been told. Their faces shifted through wonder, fear, and the quiet that accompanies conviction. Then they sharpened axes. Trees fell with the resignation of witnesses. Beams stretched under calloused hands. The valley learned a new rhythm. Strike, lift, set. Strike, lift, set. People came first out of curiosity, then for amusement. They asked what kind of house had no field around it, what kind of ship had no water to greet it. Noah answered, with the words he'd been given. Waters will come. The Lord will judge what we have chosen. Enter and live. Laughter keeps company with pride. Giants approached like storms in human shape, smiles wide, eyes narrowed. Ardok spoke first, the ground seeming to agree with each step he took. Old man, he called, build your box, and when it is done, we will use it to teach our young how to carry mountains. His companions approved with a roar that shook dust from rafters. Others suggested improvements, offered to carve their names into the ribs so that the ark would at least honor greatness. Noah kept working. His sons kept passing timbers. Every strike of the mallet sounded like a heartbeat, refusing to match the world's rhythm. Mockery grew into spectacle. Feasts set up within sight of the rising hull. Musicians found a tempo that made ridicule pleasant. Dancers wove around piles of lumber, and wine traveled cup to cup as if the valley had been transformed into a joke only the righteous could not understand. Some men, not giants, but eager for the giant's favor, performed cruelty for applause. Snapping young trees, scattering flocks, tossing stones at birds that perched on the half-made beam. When the stones missed, the crowd laughed. When one hit, the crowd laughed louder. Yet, word kept pace with workmanship. The dimensions grew, and with them the seriousness of those few who could feel the air changing. An elder from a hill village came, hat in hand, and asked questions not about the hull but about holiness. Noah answered, as a man who had run out of cleverness long ago, I do not know how to save the world. I have only been told how to obey. Come, when the Lord opens the door. In time, the ark stood as an answer you could touch. It cast a new kind of shadow, the kind that asks whether a man loves light. Food stores rose in neat ranks inside. Jars were stoppered, grain lifted in baskets, fruit dried and stacked. The sight drew fresh laughter. He is building a barn that floats, a voice jeered. He dreams of sailing from harvest to harvest. Another called to Noah's sons with the playful cruelty of men who believe themselves invulnerable. Leave the old man's story. Come to the squares. There is joy there that does not smell of pitch. Then the first sign arrived that mockery could not swallow. Across hills and gullies, along dry creek beds, and from tree lines, animals began to appear. Not in panic, not in frenzy, but in order. Pairs first, then the sevens, as Noah had been told. Foxes walked without slyness. Doves came as if to a home they remembered. Heavy-hoofed beasts found sure footing on planks. Birds settled along the rail in ranks that shifted and held. Children fell silent. Even the giants watched, their hands at rest for once. Wonder wrapped the valley like cool air. Noah spoke again, not louder but clearer. 7 days. The door will not always be open. Choose whom you will believe, the crowd that applauds itself, or the one who made you to breathe. The valley considered, and then the drums began anew. Wine was raised to the sky as if toasting a patient god. Laughter returned, larger, as if to drown the memory of stillness. Noah and his household entered the ark. The door stood wide as mercy. The world stood wide as defiance. And time, which had waited for the completion of obedience, began to count in sevens toward a rain it had never known. On the 7th morning, the sky wore an unfamiliar face. Clouds gathered from directions that did not agree with one another, piling like mountains upon mountains. A wind came that did not cool, only announced. Noah stood in the doorway and waited. He did not shut the door. He would not shut what he had not opened. The first drops were fat and far apart, each one darkening the dust with a perfect circle. Children put out their tongues to taste them. Men raised cups as a joke. Women drew shawls around their shoulders and said it would pass. Then the sky leaned closer and spoke fluently. Rain became a curtain, then a wall. The ground drank until it could not, and when it could not, it shone and ran. A sound rose beneath the rain, old as creation and angrier. The fountains of the deep burst, and water came from below as well as above. A betrayal by the earth itself. Gullies became streams. Streams became brown rivers that forgot their banks. The tents nearest the low places lifted, shrugged, and floated badly. A shout went up, not in mockery now, but in sudden arithmetic. How high? How fast? At the ark, the last hesitant ones arrived, eyes wide, voices thin. "Open!" they cried, pounding with hands that moments ago had lifted cups. "We believe you now." Noah's face did not change, but his hands trembled at his sides. He turned and looked down the length of the hull, at the rooms filled, at the sons of his sons gathered like small fires. He stepped back from the threshold because the choice was no longer his. The door moved as if pushed by an invisible tide. It swung inward with the dignity of judgment and stopped, sealed. The sound it made was not loud, but it carried further than thunder. The giants were last to abandon laughter. They stood knee-deep, then thigh-deep, in water that pulled as it passed, and boasted to one another as if volume could mend the world. Ardok slapped Malek's shoulder, promising the hunt of a lifetime, and struck for higher ground with strokes that sprayed the surface like wings. He reached a ridge and turned to grin, but the ridge was already an island, and the island already hungry. He looked beyond it to mountains he had run as a boy, and calculated. "There," he said, and threw himself toward a slope that should have been security. People flowed the same direction, a human river within the greater flood, lifting children, pushing elders, praying with the names they could still remember. Houses tilted and split with the sound of old wood surprised by force. Walls that had kept out wind let in water. Shrines bent like reeds, their stones rolling upon one another with a grinding that worked into the bones of those who heard it. At the ark, fists beat until the skin split. "Noah!" The names multiplied. Friend, cousin, neighbor, each cry heavy with history. Within, Noah pressed his forehead against timber and spoke into the pitch-black grain. "If I could, I would." He knew he spoke truth. He also knew truth did not move wood that God had shut. His sons gathered behind him, not touching, as if their father were a lamp they dared not jostle. The flood did not argue. It persisted. Animals within the ark shifted, uneasy with the rise and tilt, then steadied as the hull lifted cleanly from the earth. The sensation was both triumph and sorrow. Outside, men climbed trees that had never carried such weight. Branches snapped like curses. Others lashed doors together as rafts, then watched the rafts spin and vanish into the backs of waves. A mother knelt in water to lift her child to a stranger's shoulders. A stranger became a savior and then a silhouette. Giants, who had learned to treat gravity like an opinion, met a law they could not amend. They found out what every swimmer learns too late. The water is strong because it is many. Arms that had torn gates slowed. Lungs that had sung boasts burned. One by one they reached boulders and outcrops and declared them fortresses with a gasp, only to feel the fortresses soften as the waters climbed the slopes like ladders. Ardok gained a ledge just below a cliffside and stood, chest heaving, hair plastered to his head, eyes still bright with defiance. He looked toward the ark as if it were an adversary. He lifted both hands, not in surrender, but in stubborn oath. Then the ledge under him surrendered, and he dropped into a churn that did not give him back. By the 40th day, The world had forgotten what dry meant. The highest trees showed only their fingertips. Mountains received a gray crown and then lowered their heads under it. Voices thinned to threads and then to nothing. The last cries were not clever. They were single words, mercy, mother. God flung like stones at a sky that did not throw them back. Within the ark, life moved by faith and by schedule. Feed, tend, pray, sleep, wake. Outside, there was only the wide, level judgment, clean and terrible and complete. Silence followed the shouting world. Not the quiet of a sleeping village, but the hush that comes when everything that made noise has been laid down. The ark rose and fell on a breadth of water that had erased maps and arguments alike. Inside, life kept time with duty. Grain poured from sacks in careful measures. Hoof and claw and wing learned patience as if it were a language. Noah counted days by prayer, not by sky, because cloud and horizon were the same color and the same distance. The flood wore the face of forever until, one morning, the wind changed. It did not announce itself with drama. It simply moved across the face of the waters with purpose, the way a hand smooths a troubled brow. Beneath, the deep surrendered its fury and remembered its boundaries. Currents began to flow where chaos had been. The ark, which had learned the long lesson of drifting, felt a different pressure guidance rather than aimlessness. Weeks later, the timbers shivered with a new sensation, stillness beneath them. The hull kissed stone. The ark rested. They did not rush the door. To be preserved by obedience is to continue obeying. Noah waited. He loosed a raven first, and the black arc of its wings wrote a question into the air. It went to and fro over the waters, finding no rest that could loosen its hunger for long. Then he sent a dove, small and sure, as if hope should wear humility. She returned quickly. The world was not ready to hold her peace. 7 days he waited, and 7 again the patience of a man who had learned that haste is kin to disbelief. When the dove came back the second time, she brought a secret between her beak. A single olive leaf, green as a whispered promise. Everyone gathered to see the small flag of future. Even the beasts shifted as if they could smell the word land inside that living sliver. 7 more days. Noah opened his hand one last time, and the dove did not return. Hope had found a home. Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked. The great leveling had ended. Mountains lifted their faces again, and valleys showed their lines like the reopening of pages long shut. Mud glistened where rivers would run. Trees stood like dark exclamation marks against a horizon that had learned a hard sentence. The earth did not look like the world they had known, but it looked like a world that could be known again. A voice spoke that had once commanded lumber and now commanded life. Come out of the ark, you and your wife, and your sons and your sons' wives with you. Bring out every living thing with you of all flesh, so that they may swarm on the earth, be fruitful, and multiply. The command was not a suggestion, it was a gift. They came out to a brightness that made their eyes water, to air that smelled of washed stone and beginnings. Hoof met ground, pads pressed soil, wings stitched the clean sky with quick seams. The earth, scoured and made ready, received them. Noah's first act was not to count what remained, but to acknowledge who remained. He gathered stones and built an altar, the simplest architecture of gratitude. He chose of the clean beasts and clean birds, and the smoke rose straight because the wind had decided to serve, not to scatter. The Lord regarded the offering and answered not with rain, not with a blade, but with words that bend history. I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. A covenant took shape, not as a treaty between equals, but as mercy from the Maker to the made. God blessed Noah and his sons, and set the old command in their hands as if it were new. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. He established the dignity of blood and the sanctity of life, drawing borders around violence so that strength could remember its purpose. And to memory he tied a sign. Across the brushed sky, still damp, still learning color, he bent a bow of light. It gathered the broken spectrum into one arc and laid it like a bridge between heaven and earth. When the bow is in the cloud, he said, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant. Noah stood with his sons beneath that brightness and let the promise soak into them. The world that had drowned would not be drowned again. The giants who had strutted upon the fields would not return to dictate law by laughter and threat. The name that had been mocked would be spoken aloud in households, in vineyards, on hills where children would chase one another without flinching at a shadow. This did not mean men would quit their sin. It meant God would not quit his mercy. Judgment had done its terrifying work. Grace would do its enduring one. They began, as all true beginnings do, small, tents raised, vines coaxed into trellises, furrows cut and trusted with seed. The rhythm of honest days returned, sweat that smells like prayer, bread that tastes like peace. Thunder still visited the mountains, but the bow visited after, and hearts learned to read it. Whenever a child pointed and asked, "What is that?" a father could answer, "A promise," and not be lying. And the earth, cleansed of the boast that had cost it so dearly, breathed. New ground does not erase old hearts. The world had been washed, but the human will still carried the sediments of pride. Noah's family spread out, set stakes, learned the contours of valleys that wore the freshness of a healed wound. Children were born who never heard a drum that celebrated cruelty. They chased one another along terraces cut for vines and asked their fathers for stories. The fathers told the truth of a door that shut without human hands, of waters that remembered every boast, of a bow in the clouds that meant the sun would be trusted again. Some children listened and grew humble. Some only learned that greatness can end with a splash and decided they would be more careful. Seasons rolled like obedient wheels. Grain bowed and rose again. Vines found their ladder and climbed. At evening, the wind came down from the ridges and moved through tents like a blessing. But memory is a discipline, and disciplines grow thin if they are not fed. The stories of the giants turned in some mouths from warnings into wonders. People who had never seen Ardok's grin embroidered it with gold. They said mighty with the tone of a prayer. They forgot that songs can be shackles when they are sung to the wrong throne. Noah walked the rows of his vineyard with steps that had learned caution. He had seen what unruled strength can do and what unruled desire becomes. He taught his sons to honor the covenant and to fear the God who makes it. But a father cannot plant conviction the way he plants vines. Each man must learn awe for himself or invent an altar to his own name. The first hints of forgetfulness arrived as small choices. A festival louder than a harvest, a bargain kept loosely, a jest made at the expense of holiness. Harmless they were called. Harmless things multiplied, become weather. The remnant that remembered spoke quietly and often. The rainbow is not decoration, they said. It is a sign. Blood is not for sport, they said. It is sacred. Strength is not a right, they said. It is stewardship. Some nodded and returned to their fields with renewed reverence. Others found their eyes drawn to the horizon, where a new city's walls were rumored to rise, where talk of towers was already loosening tongues. The old appetite for height, the one that measures worth by visibility, stirred under ribs. If we stand where all can see us, the heart whispers, perhaps heaven will notice us on our terms. Mothers, wise with the wisdom of losses they did not personally suffer, taught a counter-song to their children. They sang of Abel's quiet offering and Cain's loud field. They sang of Lamech's boast and Seth's prayer. They sang of Enoch, who knew his breath was brief and used it to call upon the Lord. Over and over, they braided one refrain into their days. Someday, someone will tell you that glory lives in the mirror. Do not believe him. Glory lives where knees bend. Graves appeared on hills where no graves had been. Men died as all men do, of age and accident, and the frailty named in Enoch's name. The earth received them gently. On those hills markers were set with few words. A name, a number of years, a phrase that mattered, walked with God, kept covenant, taught sons to pray. Other stones in other places bore carvings that sprawled and bragged. The difference between the two could be felt even by children who could not yet read. And still the rainbow returned in its seasons, its curve quiet as logic, its color bright as mercy. Whenever the bow burned above the fields, those who remembered lifted their faces and let gratitude anchor them again. The bow's arc taught them to curve, not to climb, to bend their will toward obedience, to lay their weapons down before they learned to love them. It reminded them that the God who judges is the God who holds back his hand for the sake of promise. Around night fires the tale ripened to its true size. The Nephilim had not been gods. They had been mirrors held too close. They took what was good, strength, beauty, craft, and turned them inward until the gifts devoured the givers. Their ending was not an accident. It was a mercy severe enough to save the world that came after. The lesson did not demand terror. It demanded truth. You become what you adore. If you adore your arm, you will be eaten by your appetite for power. If you adore your face, you will starve your soul to feed your reflection. If you adore the Lord, you will find that humility can carry more glory than any giant's name. Thus, the post-flood earth learned to walk between two cliffs, presumption on one side, despair on the other. The path was narrow but sure, marked by altars and harvests, by vows kept at cost, by songs that rose not to celebrate men, but to steady them. And on that path, families taught their children to choose the right kind of greatness, the kind that bows, the kind that blesses, the kind that remembers why the world was spared. History does not vanish. It waits in the edges of our days, asking to be remembered. The tale of the giants who defied God is not only a monument to what was, it is a mirror for what may be. For the same raw materials lie within every age: strength hungry for applause, beauty eager to be worshipped, craft that forgets its giver, desire that names itself destiny. The Nephilim were not accidents. They were the arithmetic of a heart that adds self to self until nothing higher can be seen. So the story closes with a choice as old as breath. Two lines still walk the earth in every generation. One polishes the world until it reflects its own face, then calls the reflection divine. It builds shrines to appetite, crowns pride with ceremony, trains children to measure worth by noise and height. The other bows before the name and learns to love the work that does not trend, sewing, mending, keeping covenant when no one is counting. From the first line come towers and slogans, and the music that coils inward. From the second come altars and vows, and the song that climbs. Remember how the drift began. It was not a thunderclap. It was a festival, a bargain, a flirtation with what seemed harmless. It was admiration turning into imitation, curiosity promoted to creed. In a market square, a man set down a prayer to pick up a cup, and a future stepped onto the path that led to giants. In a valley, a woman asked, "Does your God forbid joy?" And a lineage forgot the difference between joy that heals and joy that hollows. No empire is needed to defect from heaven, only a handful of daily trades, small enough to pass without remark, heavy enough to tilt the world in time. And remember how the rescue came. Not by argument, by obedience. One man heard and built, his sons lifted and set. A door opened, life entered. God shut what God had opened. The world mocked until the world drowned, and then the ark rose with a dignity the crowd had never understood. Even the animals knew more than the clever that week. They came when called. They waited when told. They stepped onto new ground as if they remembered Eden. Their feet, their wings, their breath were catechisms in motion. Receive, trust, begin. If the rainbow means anything in your sky, let it mean this: judgment is real, and mercy is nearer. The bow points away from the earth. The string is slack. The archer has promised restraint. Seed time and harvest endure, because the Maker has chosen to bind his patience to his word. But patience is not permission. The flood's waters receded, not the truth it declared. What we adore, we become. Worship violence, and your strength will eat you. Worship beauty, and your face will become a prison. Worship craft, and your tools will own your hands. Worship the Lord, and you will be free enough to serve, strong enough to love, quiet enough to hear when the next ark-sized command is given. So learn the counter rhythms. Choose altars over mirrors. Let music rise past your chest to the one who invented sound. Let the forge serve the field, not the fist. Teach your children to read the sky, the bow, the promise, the humility it implies. Tell them the names Abel and Cain, Lamech and Seth, Enoch and Noah, not as trivia, but as signposts on the narrow road between presumption and despair. When the festivals swell and the world applauds itself, light a smaller fire, and remember, when a voice says, "Take what you can, become what they fear," answer with the older sentence, "I will become what he loves." The giants are gone, but their invitations remain. So does the covenant. Between the two stands a door that is open today. Enter while it stands open. Build what he commands, though the valley laughs. And when the clouds gather, lift your eyes. The bow still burns, the promise still holds, and the God who judged the earth to save it still calls the humble mighty.